The hall was carved from living crystal, a cathedral of light where every surface shimmered with alien brilliance, yet for him it was a cage. The lone human envoy walked between towering pillars as thousands of eyes followed, measuring him as if he were a fragile specimen. They had expected more from humanity, perhaps warriors in shining armor or beings wrapped in cosmic power, but what they got was one man, unarmed, ordinary by their standards, and already dismissed as beneath their notice. He could feel the weight of judgment pressing down with every step, the whisper of silk-robed courtiers as they murmured among themselves, the sharp, subtle gestures that meant insult in a dozen alien tongues. He carried their contempt like a second cloak, yet he kept his head high, steady, because the moment he faltered, they would all believe they had been right about him. He had been sent as a symbol, not as a savior. That truth sat heavy on his chest as he stood at the edge of the negotiation table. His role was to breathe, to observe, to exist, proof that humanity sought peace. He was not supposed to speak unless spoken to, not supposed to intervene, not supposed to remind them that beneath his plain appearance beat the heart of a species that had survived on sheer stubbornness and fire. His people had gambled everything on him, and yet, standing here, he wondered if they understood just how powerless one man could feel beneath the gaze of a galactic empire. The princess entered then, and the air shifted. She was not tall, not in the way her towering guards were, but she seemed to bend gravity itself. Light clung to her form, rippling across skin that shimmered like liquid silver. Her eyes, deep, luminous pools of amethyst, slid across the chamber, touching every soul present with a weight that could crush or uplift. When they landed on him, he felt it like a hand against his chest, soft yet insistent, lingering longer than it should have. He could not look away. The court might see her as divine, untouchable, but to him she was terrifyingly alive, a creature of warmth hidden beneath ceremony. The double edge of that gaze cut through him, judgment, yes, but also curiosity. And something in that curiosity made his breath tighten. The negotiations began with ritual precision, every phrase layered with meaning, every gesture a veiled challenge. Her father, the emperor, spoke of alliances, of threats beyond their borders, of the necessity of unity. Rival houses spat venom beneath silken words, blaming one another for weakness, for treachery, for every failing in their long history. The human stayed silent. He knew his place. But his eyes were on her. The princess sat poised, her posture regal, her expression carved from serenity, yet he noticed the subtle shift of her fingers against the table's edge, the faint tremor that her attendants ignored. He saw the way her shoulders stiffened with every raised voice, the way her glow dimmed with every argument. He wondered if anyone else even noticed. Perhaps they thought her unshakable, a symbol rather than flesh and blood. But he had spent his life reading the smallest cracks in strength, and he knew something was wrong. The chamber's tension thickened like smoke. Every word thrown across the table carried the weight of centuries. He listened, his jaw tight, wanting to speak, to remind them that humanity understood division too well, but he swallowed it down. He was not here to argue. He was here to survive. Yet his eyes never left her, and as he watched, the shimmer of her skin dulled further, her breaths shallowed. She blinked too slowly, her hand clutching the edge of the table as if to steady herself. He wanted to move then, but what could he do? To interrupt would be suicide. To draw attention to her weakness might shame her in front of her enemies. Still, the unease crawled down his spine, gnawing at him. Something inside whispered, "Do not ignore this." It happened too quickly. One moment her voice, low and steady, cut through the chamber's bickering. The next, it broke, her body swaying as if the strength had been stripped away. The glow fled from her skin, leaving her pale, trembling. A ripple of gasps swept the hall as she collapsed against the table, sliding down, her attendants rushing in a storm of shimmering robes and panicked cries. The emperor rose, his voice a roar, commanding healers forward, demanding answers. They came, bearing instruments that flared with light, but none of it mattered. The princess's chest rose shallowly, then stilled, her head lolling, eyes half-closed and dim. The room erupted in chaos. Courtiers shrieked, advisors argued, accusations already flying about poison and sabotage. He stood frozen at first, the human who was supposed to remain invisible. His heart pounded, ears filled with the thunder of his own blood. They would not reach her in time. The healers fumbled with devices that meant nothing, shining beams and whispered incantations of technology. She was slipping away before his eyes. And something broke inside him. Before he could think, he moved. He shoved past attendants, ignoring the cries, ignoring the guards who reached for weapons. He knelt beside her, his hands sliding beneath her body, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The court gasped in horror, scandal rippling like a storm. A human, touching their princess? It was unthinkable, an insult beyond words. But he did not care. Protocol meant nothing now. She was cold against his arms, her head falling against his chest, hair soft against his throat. His heart hammered, each beat echoing against her frail form. He whispered her name, though no one had taught him how to pronounce it perfectly. It was instinct, raw and reckless, the same instinct that had driven humanity to hold on through ice ages, wars, and hunger. Do not let go. Not now. Not her. And as he held her, as the uproar crashed around him, a silence spread within his arms, a fragile stillness where nothing else mattered but the faint weight of the princess cradled to his chest. He did not know if he had already failed, or if something within that touch still had the power to change everything. Gasps and cries rippled through the court as he lifted her higher, the scandal of his touch clashing with the raw truth that no one else dared to act. The princess lay against his chest, fragile and fading, her glow dim like embers beneath ash. Alien hands reached to tear him away, but her body trembled faintly at his grasp, and for the first time since she had fallen, a sign of life stirred. He pulled her closer, ignoring shouts of blasphemy, ignoring the blades half-drawn. His only thought was to hold her firmly, to give her something no machine, no ritual, no empire could provide, his heartbeat, steady, human, relentless. Her skin was cool against his warmth, like ice pressed to flesh, and instinct drove him to shield her, to wrap his arms around her as if he could pour his strength directly into her failing body. His rough human hands, calloused from years of work, were clumsy against the smoothness of her form, but he did not loosen his grip. His breath, uneven with fear, brushed her cheek, his chest rising and falling in rhythm that pressed against her shallow gasps. Alien healers shouted that his contact was contamination, an offense to her purity, but he ignored them, whispering words meant for no one but her. A faint shiver ran through her body. At first he thought it was the tremor of death, the last echo of a life slipping beyond his reach, but then her lips parted slightly, the faintest exhalation escaping her throat. His heart jolted as if struck. He tightened his hold, lowering his head, his words spilling in hushed, urgent tones, nonsense perhaps to alien ears, but filled with meaning. Stay, breathe, don't leave. His warmth surrounded her, his voice anchored her, and something in that connection drew her back from the void. Her chest rose in a sudden, fragile breath. The glow on her skin flickered, faint at first, then steadier. He felt it before anyone else saw it, the faint return of life against his heart, a pulse syncing with his own. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed at first, then sharpening, pupils locking onto him with startling clarity. Her fingers, weak and trembling, curled against his chest, clutching at the fabric of his garment as though it alone tethered her to existence. A single gasp escaped her lips, her body shuddering violently in his arms, and the chamber froze. The court erupted, a storm of voices crashing in disbelief. Some cried miracle, others heresy. Her father surged forward, his regal mask fractured by awe and fear, but even he stopped short as his daughter clung tighter to the human's chest, refusing to let go. Advisors hissed accusations, claiming sorcery, claiming manipulation, claiming a hidden weapon disguised as flesh. The healers demanded she be separated, placed in containment, but she raised her hand, weak, trembling, yet sovereign, and silenced them with a single gesture. Her gaze did not leave the envoy, her voice raw and soft, but unmistakable. Do not take him from me. He stared down at her, stunned. He had expected her to collapse again, to fade despite his desperation, but she looked at him with such clarity that it stole the breath from his lungs. He tried to speak, to explain he had done nothing but hold her, but the words caught in his throat. Her family leaned closer, their eyes sharp with suspicion, demanding answers. He swallowed, forcing his voice steady, though every nerve still shook. He said the truth. He had done nothing but cradle her, nothing but give what came naturally to him. They called it impossible. They demanded more. But the princess shook her head, pressing her forehead lightly against his chest, her whisper so soft it was meant for him alone. It was you. I felt your heartbeat. It called me back. He froze, her words cutting through the chaos louder than any roar. Around them, the court broke into fractured arguments, but none of it reached him. All he could feel was the fragile weight of her, alive, shivering in his arms, her skin slowly regaining its radiance beneath his touch. She did not let go, even as her attendants begged her to step away. Every breath she took pressed against his chest, sinking with his rhythm, until the thought of releasing her seemed like betrayal. He had been sent to stand silent, to represent peace, but now he was something else entirely, an anchor, a lifeline, perhaps even a threat. The princess stirred again, lifting her face toward him, her luminous eyes meeting his with a weight that stripped away every layer of formality. The double edge of her gaze was sharper now, filled with gratitude, but also something unspoken, something that tightened his chest more than fear ever had. Her lips parted, a tremulous smile forming as she breathed, "You are not like them." The words fell between them like a vow, heavy, intimate, and undeniable. The courtiers hissed at the scandal, the insult to her own people, but she ignored them all, her focus only on him. He tried again to explain, to insist he was ordinary, that nothing in him was divine or miraculous, but she silenced him with the pressure of her fingers curling tighter into his tunic. He realized then that it did not matter what logic dictated. What mattered was what she believed, and what her family had seen. Their gasps still echoed, disbelief written across every face. To them, he had broken the natural order. To her, he had done more, he had reminded her what it felt like to be alive, not as a princess of an empire, but as a woman bound to another heartbeat. Around them, suspicion hardened into fury. Guards shifted uneasily, weapons half raised, their loyalty torn between protecting her life and punishing the insult of his touch. Advisors whispered furiously to the emperor, their words poisoned with fear of what this meant. But none dared move against him, not while the princess herself refused to release her hold. The silence between them, fragile yet undeniable, became a shield stronger than any blade. And in that moment, as the chaos raged at the edges of his hearing, he understood the truth that none of them wanted to admit. Nothing he had carried into this hall, no technology, no power, had revived her. It had been the simplest, most human act in the universe, the warmth of his arms, the rhythm of his heart, the refusal to let her go. That was the weapon her people had never accounted for, the one force they could not replicate. And as she drew another deep breath, her eyes never leaving his, he realized that no matter what storm followed, nothing could erase what had just happened between them. The chamber did not settle after her revival, it fractured. The emperor's voice thundered demands for explanation, but his authority met resistance in the swell of panic and suspicion. Courtiers hissed, advisors shouted accusations, healers muttered theories of forbidden science. Their words lashed at him like knives, accusing him of sorcery, of smuggling technology, of violating sacred taboos. He stood rigid under their scrutiny, the princess still pressed to his chest, her fragile hand clutching at him like a tether. His only defense was the truth, that he had done nothing, that he had no hidden devices, no secret weapon. Yet in a room built on power and politics, truth was the weakest defense of all. Her father's eyes burned with suspicion as he demanded again, what had the human done to his daughter? The envoy's throat tightened, but he forced himself to answer, steady and clear, that all he had given her was warmth and the will not to let her go. Laughter and outrage broke out around the court at such a claim, voices spitting that humans sought to mask manipulation in poetic words. But before he could be seized, a single sound cut through the noise, the princess's own voice. Still weak, still fragile, yet carrying a sharp edge of defiance. She said plainly that he had saved her, not with science, not with forbidden tricks, but with something none of them understood. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Her family tried to dismiss it as delirium, the ramblings of one who had been near death, but the princess's gaze sharpened, her strength returning as she declared before them all that she owed her life to him. The envoy felt the weight of her words like chains and wings all at once, knowing how they twisted the balance of power. She had chosen to defend him, and in doing so, she bound him to her fate. When gods moved to pull him away, she reached out and caught his wrist, holding it with trembling determination. Her family's commands faltered at the sight. Princesses did not clutch their saviors as though they were lifelines. Yet she did not let go. Later, in the quieter chambers of her private hall, away from the court's roar, he stood awkwardly while attendants fussed around her. Every instinct told him to leave, to escape the storm that brewed, but she dismissed her servants with a single look until only the two of them remained. She sat with her glow faint but steady, and her eyes found him in the silence. Gratitude was there, yes, but beneath it something more intimate, something that made his pulse stumble. She thanked him, not as a sovereign thanks a subject, but as a woman speaking to the one who had pulled her from darkness. She told him she remembered the rhythm of his heart, the warmth of his arms, how they had called her back when the cold had almost claimed her. No science, no healer had ever given her such strength. He faltered, insisting it had been nothing, that he was ordinary, but she shook her head, her lips curving in the faintest, knowing smile. Ordinary to him, perhaps. To her, extraordinary. She leaned closer then, not in weakness but in curiosity, studying him as though his every breath might reveal the mystery. She asked if all humans carried such warmth, if all could bind another so fiercely by presence alone. Her words, innocent to her, carried a weight he could not mistake. He struggled to answer, caught between honesty and fear, knowing that the pull he felt toward her was not something diplomatic language could contain. He told her quietly that humans had no special power, only the stubbornness to hold on when the world tried to take what mattered. Her gaze softened, and he saw in her eyes that she understood, perhaps better than anyone else could. Outside, whispers spread like wildfire. The court no longer debated her survival but what it meant. Some called for his execution, fearing that if humanity possessed such a gift, they could overthrow the natural order of the empire. Others argued he should be studied, dissected if necessary, to understand the force within him. But whispers also rose among those who saw opportunity, a new bond between species, a weapon to be wielded, a miracle to claim. Every faction twisted the moment to fit their ambitions. Yet through it all, the princess did not waver. She refused to allow him to be separated from her, declaring with sharpened clarity that his presence was vital to her strength. This defiance cut deeper than any sword. Her father raged, fearing the scandal, the political upheaval, the danger of placing his daughter's life in the hands of an alien outsider. But the princess stood taller, her glow brightening as she said with unshakable conviction that she would not be parted from the one who had brought her back. He stood silent at her side, torn between dread and awe, knowing her words tied them together in a knot no decree could easily sever. And in the spaces between their declarations, he felt it, the shift of something unspoken, intimate, dangerous. Every glance lingered longer than it should. Every brush of her fingers against his arm carried heat that no alien healer could explain. Her words, laced with double edges, hinted at more than gratitude. She spoke of heartbeat and warmth, of bonds beyond duty. To her family it was strange poetry, perhaps even madness. To him, it was a confession that stirred his blood and frightened him with its honesty. The divide widened with each passing hour. The Empire wanted him caged. Rivals wanted him eliminated. Yet the princess, luminous once more, openly defied them all, declaring before her family that she would not relinquish the human who had cradled her when even they could not. The envoy realized then that whatever path lay ahead, there was no going back. The line had been crossed, not by choice but by the undeniable force of touch and the awakening it had wrought. In that fragile moment, as she held his hand once more with trembling fingers that refused to release him, he saw the truth in her eyes. She had been saved, not as a princess of an empire, but as a woman who had felt life return in the arms of a man she was never meant to touch. And her family's stares, sharp and unyielding, carried the weight of that revelation, fear, awe, and the dawning recognition that this bond, once formed, could not be broken. The hall filled again, not with the chaos of her collapse but with the storm of consequence. Word had already spread through every corner of the court, how the princess had fallen, how alien science had failed, and how the human's arms had pulled her back from death. Every faction came armed with suspicion or hunger, voices sharpened like blades, demanding answers. The emperor sat rigid, his expression carved from iron, his gaze fixed not on his daughter but on the envoy who stood beside her. He was no longer invisible, no longer the quiet symbol of peace. He was the center, the spark around which the empire now burned. Advisors cried for containment, rivals accused him of treachery, warriors demanded his blood to cleanse the insult of his touch. Yet against that storm, the princess rose to her feet. Her glow, steady and radiant, silenced them before her words even came. She walked with deliberate grace until she stood at his side, her hand finding his without hesitation. The court froze as her fingers entwined with his, scandal painted across every face. Then, with a voice clear and unyielding, she declared that he was the reason she stood before them at all. Their machines had failed. Their rituals had failed. He alone had brought her back. The uproar shook the chamber, but her voice cut through it again, steady as steel. She told them she felt his heart call her back when the void tried to take her, that his warmth ignited what their science could not. To some, it was sacred, a miracle long lost. To others, it was blasphemy, an insult to every healer and scholar in their history. Yet no one could deny what they had seen. She had been fading, and in his arms she had returned. He wanted to speak, to temper her words, to insist he was no miracle worker. But her grip tightened, silencing him before he could diminish the truth she had chosen to claim. She turned to her family then, her eyes fierce. She said plainly that she would not be separated from him. Not for protocol. Not for pride. Not even for politics. Her words were scandalous, but more dangerous was the conviction behind them. It was not duty speaking, but choice. She was not appealing for permission, she was declaring her will. The emperor's voice thundered in rage, demanding she remember her place, demanding she think of the empire rather than her own desires. But she did not falter. She stood closer to him, her glow brightening as if his presence fed her strength. She said her life had already been claimed by death, and only through him had it been returned. To deny him now would be to deny the truth of her existence. Her family stared, struck silent by the force of her defiance. The envoy's chest tightened as every eye turned to him, waiting for his words, waiting to see if he would seize this power or stumble beneath it. He could not speak the polished lies of politics. He spoke as he had acted, raw, simple, human. He said he did not know why she had returned, did not understand what thread had bound her to his touch. All he knew was that when he held her, he could not let her go, and that now, even in this hole of suspicion and threat, he would not release her hand. His honesty rippled through the chamber more deeply than any grand speech could have, stripping away pretense and leaving only truth. The silence broke like glass. Some factions whispered of alliances, imagining a bond between species more powerful than any treaty. Others whispered of betrayal, convinced humanity had unearthed a weapon more dangerous than fleets. But before the storm could rise again, the princess stepped forward, raising their joined hands high. Her declaration rang across the chamber. She belonged to no healer, no rival, no prophecy. She belonged to the one who had cradled her when she was dying, to the one whose heartbeat had pulled her back. The court gasped as the words fell heavy with double meaning, sacred vow or scandalous confession, none could decide. Her father's fury trembled at the edges of control, but even he could not undo what the court had witnessed. To tear them apart now would be to admit weakness before every rival. To imprison the human would be to risk the wrath of his daughter, whose revival had already taken on the weight of legend. The court shifted uneasily, sensing that something irreversible had taken root. The envoy felt the pressure of it all, the burden of being thrust into a role he had never sought, yet beneath the weight, there was also clarity. This was not a role born of strategy or deceit. It was born of the simple truth of touch, of connection, of refusing to let her slip into the dark. He looked down at her as she leaned closer, her eyes luminous, her lips brushing the air between them with words meant only for him. That he had given her more than life, he had given her a reason to live. The chamber erupted once more, but that closeness drowned it out, the storm fading into background noise against the simple fact of her choice. She pressed her forehead to his chest, listening to the rhythm that had once called her back, and in front of her family, in front of an empire, she claimed him not with chains of duty but with the quiet strength of defiance. The uproar could not diminish the truth. The human had entered their court as a symbol of weakness, a pawn to be overlooked. He now stood as something no one had accounted for, proof that humanity's strength was not in weapons or fleets, but in the impossible resilience of its heart. No science had saved her. No empire had restored her. Only a heartbeat, stubborn and relentless, had done what none of them could. And as the court grappled with the meaning, as suspicion and award in their eyes, the envoy understood that nothing would ever be the same. He had come as a shadow, faceless among giants. Now, because he had refused to let go, because he had chosen to hold her when all else had failed, he stood as the man who had revived their princess. Whatever storm followed, whatever war or alliance, nothing could erase the moment she breathed again in his arms. Humanity had spoken not with words, not with power, but with touch, and the galaxy would never forget it.